Have you ever seen a wild animal ask a human for help? Not in a movie, not in a storybook, but in real life. In the harsh, unforgiving wilderness, where nature plays by its own rules. What if I told you that deep in the frozen tundra of Arctic Alaska, during one of the coldest winters ever recorded, something happened that defied every known instinct of the wild? In the isolated region near Utqiagvik, one of the northernmost places on Earth, where temperatures drop below 40 degrees and the sun barely rises in March, a mother bear emerged from the snowy silence. She wasn't hunting. She wasn't protecting her territory. She wasn't running away. She was carrying her cub. And what she did next would leave even the most seasoned park rangers speechless. This isn't just a wildlife encounter. This is a story of survival, trust, and a connection between species that most people believe is impossible. It's about a Mother Ursa, a wild, majestic creature of the Arctic, making a decision that would change the way we understand the natural world. The snow was falling relentlessly, thick like a curtain between two worlds, the one we know and the one that still belongs to the wild. Visibility was low. The silence, absolute. Only the cracking of ice and the soft, exhausted breaths of a mother bear could be heard. Her name was Kaya, a name given by local Inupiat elders, meaning she who stays strong. Kaya had been spotted before, roaming the outer edges of the sanctuary zone, always distant, always cautious. But this time was different. Her movements were slow, her body weak. In her mouth, hanging by the scruff of the neck, was a tiny, unmoving cub, barely old enough to walk, and clearly struggling to survive the brutal cold. And then, she crossed the line, literally. She walked past the frozen boundary of trees and snowbanks, emerging from the whiteout fog, and made her way toward a group of stunned wildlife observers. Among them was Mike, a volunteer from Yukon with over a decade of experience in wildlife photography and Arctic conservation. He had seen wolves hunt, bears fight, and even animals survive after avalanches. But he had never seen anything like this. Kaya stopped a few meters from the observation platform, placed her cub on the snow-covered ground, and looked up, right into Mike's eyes, not with aggression, not with fear, but with something that looked a lot like trust, or maybe desperation. This is the kind of moment that rewrites the rules, that forces you to question everything you thought you knew about the natural order. Why would a wild bear, a creature raised in solitude and survival, risk everything to approach a human? What did she hope would happen? Was this instinct or something more? At first, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if time had stopped, suspended in the cold, waiting to see what came next. And what did come next? Well, that's where this story truly begins. Because what happened after Kaya placed her cub on the snow wasn't just unexpected. It was something that would move people around the world, ignite debates among scientists, and restore hope in something we often forget exists in the wild: compassion. And now, let me take you step by step through one of the most emotional animal rescue stories you'll ever hear. This wasn't just another morning at the Arctic Wildlife Sanctuary. The kind of quiet that fell over the land wasn't peaceful. It was thick, tense, as if the wilderness itself was holding its breath. Snow dropped from the sky like white ash, layering everything in sight. Trees stood frozen, heavy with ice, and even the ravens, normally heard squawking in the distance, had gone silent. The temperature had dropped below 40 degrees, the kind of cold that bites through layers of fur and fabric, that makes your breath feel like shards of glass in your lungs. Out here, in the northernmost stretches of Alaska, just beyond the coastal plains of Utqiagvik, survival isn't just a matter of instinct. It's a battle, a constant negotiation between life and the elements. And that's what made this moment so astonishing. Kaya, a wild mother bear known to the rangers by her distinctive scarred muzzle and dark patches around her eyes, wasn't supposed to be here. She belonged deep in the tundra, among the drifting ice and wind-battered pines, not at the edge of the human-occupied sanctuary zone. She was cautious, reserved, even elusive. Over the past few seasons, she had been observed only briefly, always from a distance. But now she was stepping into view on her own, not to hunt, not to flee, but to approach. The snow clung to her thick fur like frost on bark. Her breath came out in slow clouds, each exhale a sign of fatigue. And in her mouth, limp and unmoving, was her cub. His fur was soaked, stiffened by ice. His tiny body barely showed signs of life. Kaya trudged forward with purpose, her paws sinking into the soft snow as she neared the outer fence of the observation platform, a low boundary designed not to contain, but to signal the end of human territory. But she didn't stop. She crossed it. Not in anger, not in fear, but in what could only be described as hope. Rangers on duty that morning froze. They reached for radios, not weapons, because no one had ever seen behavior like this before. Kaya placed her cub gently on the ground just feet away from the humans and looked up, not with wild aggression, but with calm, unwavering focus. Her eyes, dark and glistening, held something deeper than panic. It wasn't surrender, it was something else, something unspoken. Among those witnessing this moment was Mike, a seasoned volunteer from Yukon. He had worked with bears, wolves, and moose for over a decade, but this was different. He stood still, heart racing, eyes locked with hers. She didn't growl. She didn't posture. She simply remained there, as if waiting for them to understand. Mike stepped closer, slowly, cautiously. Every inch forward felt like a leap of faith. The snow crunched under his boots, the only sound breaking the frozen silence. Kaya didn't move. The others watched in stunned silence, unsure of what would happen next. The bear allowed him near her cub, an act so unheard of, it sent chills deeper than the cold. He bent down and saw it clearly. The cub was alive, but barely. Shivering, shallow breathing, body temperature dropping fast. A few more hours in that condition and the story would have ended right there. But Kaya had made a choice, an extraordinary, almost unbelievable choice, to trust a human with the life of her baby. And in that decision, something powerful was revealed. Something that makes you question what really separates us from them. Out here, in the rawest corners of the earth, things like logic and dominance don't always apply. There's instinct, yes, but sometimes there's also grace. And this was a moment of grace so fragile, so rare, it felt like witnessing a miracle carved in ice. We capture moments like this every week. True stories of survival, compassion, and the unexplainable bond between humans and wild animals. And every story brings us closer to understanding the world we share. If you're someone who believes in that connection, who wants to feel, learn, and witness the extraordinary, subscribe to this channel now. Be part of this journey with us, because there are stories unfolding in the wild that you won't hear anywhere else, and they deserve to be told. As Mike carefully lifted the cub into his arms, Kaya didn't flinch. She didn't charge. She just stood there, motionless in the snowfall, her eyes tracking every movement, her breathing steady, as if she'd known that someone would help. And that moment, of a human carrying a wild bear's baby through the snow under the weight of both ice and responsibility, was only the beginning. Because what followed in the hours to come would push everyone involved to the edge of their instincts and emotions. Mike held the cub in his arms, its tiny body fragile and nearly lifeless. The air was thick with a kind of silence no one dared to break. Each breath he took felt heavier than the snow falling around them. Kaya stood just meters away, unmoving, eyes fixed on her cub, on Mike. There was no roar, no rush, no panic. She didn't act like a wild bear defending her young. She acted like a mother who had made a decision, one that even now, as the cold stung her lungs, she refused to take back. The sanctuary staff had seen wild animals behave unpredictably before, but nothing like this. One of them whispered into the radio, calling the on-site medic team. Another tried to signal the emergency vet unit without drawing too much attention. The rest remained motionless, caught in that strange space between awe and fear, because nobody really knew what Kaya would do next. Every movement from the humans could shift the balance, could be seen as a threat, a betrayal, or worse. But Kaya didn't move. She simply waited. Mike looked down at the cub, his gloved fingers brushing ice crystals from its face. The little bear's eyes were barely open, its shallow breaths growing fainter. Its fur was wet, its nose crusted with frost. Time was running out. He had handled injured animals before. Wolves caught in traps, moose with frostbite, even an orphaned fox kit left behind by its mother. But this was different. This was a bear cub, offered by its mother. He looked back at Kaya. Their eyes locked again. And in that moment, he felt something shift deep inside. It wasn't instinct, it wasn't adrenaline. It was something else. Something older. It felt like a kind of permission. A silent message passed between species, a whisper that said, "Go, I trust you." And that's when the tension broke, but not in the way anyone expected. Kaya took a slow step back, and another. She didn't run. She didn't disappear into the trees. She stayed right there, watching, her massive body barely swaying, exhausted from the effort but grounded by something stronger than fear. Every person on site knew the risks of this moment. A sudden move, a loud sound, even the scent of medicine could provoke a reaction. But Kaya didn't react. She had made her choice. And now she was holding the line. As Mike moved toward the emergency cabin with the cub in his arms, a new kind of pressure fell on the team. Every second now mattered. The cub's condition was worsening. Its body temperature was dropping faster than expected. The medical team rushed to prepare heated blankets, oxygen, and intravenous fluids. But the cold had already done its damage. The little heart was weak, the lungs stiff. His paws, frozen stiff at the edges, told a story of hours lost in the snow. Outside, Kaya paced slowly near the edge of the platform, just far enough to keep her distance, but close enough to see. She wasn't leaving, not until she knew. Inside the cabin, Mike stayed beside the cub as the team worked. He removed his gloves to share his own body heat, pressing his hands gently against the bear's chest. The warmth was minimal, but it was all he could offer. The lead vet inserted a catheter, starting a warm saline drip. Another assistant applied a thermal patch near the cub's neck. They had to move quickly, but carefully. Every action was deliberate. Any mistake could cost the cub its life. All the while, Kaya waited. That image of a mother bear standing in a storm surrounded by humans, silent, unmoving, burned itself into the minds of everyone present. This wasn't just about a wild animal in distress. This was about a choice made under pressure, a surrender of instinct in favor of something else, something that still didn't have a name. Mike could feel the weight of it all pressing on his shoulders. The responsibility, the honor, the unspoken agreement between him and this wild mother. It felt sacred, like stepping into a story far older than himself, older than language or rules. A story passed down in snow and silence. The cub stirred slightly, its tiny paw twitching against the heating pad. A collective breath was held. It was a flicker, a sign, a beginning. Outside, Kaya's ears twitched. She lowered her head slightly, still watching, still waiting, and none of them, neither ranger nor vet nor visitor, could look away. Because what was unfolding in front of them wasn't just an animal rescue. It was a bridge, a fragile, trembling bridge built out of trust, vulnerability, and something that had no scientific definition. And they all knew. The real test was still ahead. Inside the cabin, the air felt heavier than the cold outside. It wasn't just the frost clinging to the windows or the sound of the heater struggling against the Arctic chill. It was the weight of something unspoken, something sacred that had crept in the moment Kaya stepped out of the trees and laid her cub at the feet of a human. The team moved with urgent precision, but even the most experienced hands trembled slightly, not from the temperature, but from the awareness of what they were witnessing. The cub had been stabilized, for now. Its tiny chest rose and fell slowly, its heartbeat weak but steady under layers of warm blankets and human touch. Monitors beeped quietly, a soft rhythm competing with the occasional howl of the wind outside. Mike never left its side, his hands still cupped near the cub's head, gently shielding its small face from the light, from the noise, from the unnaturalness of the human world it had just been pulled into. Every few minutes, someone would glance out the frosted window toward the trees. She was still there. Kaya, still standing, still watching, still not moving. And with every passing hour, it became harder to explain, harder to make sense of. Because wild bears don't do this. They don't cross barriers. They don't offer up their young. They don't wait silently for strangers to take over. And yet, here she was. And here was her cub, in the care of people she should have feared. What made her do it? What ancient instinct, or maybe something even more powerful, had moved her to act against every rule of her species? Around the room, theories began to circulate in hushed voices. Some believed it was pure survival instinct, a last resort by a mother desperate to save what she could not protect. Others whispered that it went deeper than biology, that Kaya, in some unexplainable way, recognized the potential for kindness in the humans she approached. That she understood somehow that these beings, these strange creatures with soft voices and warm hands, might be her cub's only chance. Mike had no words for it. He'd studied behavior, read the research, learned from elders who understood the wilderness more than any textbook ever could. But nothing prepared him for this. He had seen fear. He had seen rage. He had seen hunger, exhaustion, instinct. But what he saw in Kaya's eyes that day, he couldn't name it, only feel it. It was grief, yes, in desperation, but it was also surrender, vulnerability, and maybe, just maybe, trust. In a world where the line between wild and human grows thinner with each storm, each environmental shift, each encroachment of man into sacred land, was this a sign that something still existed between us? A bridge? A thread of empathy we've all forgotten? No one in that room could say for certain, and maybe that's the most important part of this story. The fact that it refuses to fit inside a box. It challenges logic. It disrupts the narrative of us and them. It forces us to pause and ask the kind of questions that don't come with clean answers. Why would a bear do this? What did she see in us? Was this simply instinct, or was it love? If you're watching this right now and you've been pulled in by this moment, by this impossible act of surrender between predator and protector, then tell us, have you ever seen anything like this before? In your life, in any documentary, in any news report or story passed down between generations, have you ever heard of a mother bear doing something like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would truly love to hear your perspective. Maybe you've seen something similar in nature. Maybe you felt that same kind of connection with an animal, where words failed, but something deeper was understood. Or maybe this story reminds you of something you thought you'd forgotten. And while Kaya stood outside in the snow, unfazed by time or cold, the humans inside moved between science and soul, trying to save a life that wasn't supposed to be in their care, but now undeniably was. Every heartbeat, every breath, every blink from the cub brought another layer of tension. Would he survive? Would she wait? And if she did, if this little one pulled through, what would come next? Because even now, no one could say if this story would end in joy or sorrow. All they knew was this: they had become part of something rare, and no one present would ever be the same again. Outside the cabin, Kaya didn't move, not a step, not a twitch. The snow had begun to fall more heavily now, and she stood with her back against the wind, her thick fur gradually crusting with frost. Her eyes remained fixed on the wooden structure where her cub had disappeared minutes earlier. Every instinct in her body must have been screaming, "Don't trust them, protect your young, fight if necessary." But she stood her ground, frozen in place, allowing the humans to take what she could no longer save on her own. Inside, the cub was fading again. Despite the warming fluids, despite the blankets and the soft humming of emergency monitors, his heart rate was slowing. The cold had sunk too deeply into his bones. Mike could feel the heat in the room rising, the tension mounting. One of the vets muttered something about cardiac shock. Another asked for an increase in oxygen flow. But Mike was still watching the window. He knew what had to be done. They had to act fast, But they also had to act with a kind of care that couldn't be taught in training manuals. The cub wasn't just a medical emergency. He was the center of something bigger, something ancient, something sacred. And so Mike did something no one expected. He asked everyone to step back. The room stilled. The vet paused mid-motion. The assistant froze with a saline line still half inserted. Mike wasn't panicking. He wasn't angry. He was just certain, calm. He had made a decision that didn't come from logic. It came from a place he didn't even know existed, until Kaya looked him in the eye earlier that day. He carefully lifted the cub from the padded table. The heating pad dropped away. The monitors flatlined in protest. The medical team started to object, but Mike just nodded, firmly, quietly. "There's something else we haven't tried," he said. "Something that might matter more than anything we're doing here." With the cub cradled in his arms, wrapped in every inch of insulation they could find, Mike stepped outside, into the storm, into the unknown. Everyone inside held their breath. The cold hit him like a wall. His eyelashes crusted with frost in seconds. His breath turned to vapor. But he kept moving, each step crunching beneath him as he approached the edge of the platform. Kaya saw him. She didn't growl. She didn't move. Mike walked slowly, his voice low, not even speaking to her directly. More to the wind, more to the cub, more to whatever force had orchestrated this impossible moment. His words were soft, carried away by the Arctic air before they could reach anyone's ears. And then, just a few feet from the boundary where Kaya had first placed her cub, he stopped. Kneeling down into the snow, he laid the little bear down exactly where Kaya had left him just hours earlier, still wrapped. Still breathing, barely. The same position, the same gesture, a mirrored act of faith. And then he stepped back. The snow continued to fall between them like a curtain, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Kaya didn't move. Mike didn't speak. It was just two beings separated by species, instincts, and an invisible thread neither of them fully understood. Then, with a cautious, calculated motion, Kaya stepped forward. One paw, then another. She reached the cub and lowered her head. She sniffed, nudged, let out a soft, guttural sound. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't territorial, it was maternal. It was a sound of recognition. Her massive paw reached out gently to adjust the blanket. And then she did something that none of them, neither those watching from behind glass nor the team who had witnessed countless rescues, had ever seen. She laid down, right there, in the snow, next to her cub, pressing her warm body against his in complete silence. As if to say, "This is what he needs now. Not more medicine, not more wires, just me." The air grew impossibly still. Mike watched with his heart in his throat, unsure whether he had just done something miraculous or reckless. But what he saw in that moment erased every doubt he had. Kaya was doing something no training could prepare anyone for. She was trying to bring her cub back, not with force, not with instinct, but with presence. And as the snow fell around them, a silence even deeper than before returned to the sanctuary. No one dared to speak, because what they had just witnessed was something beyond protocol, beyond biology, beyond anything they thought they knew about animal behavior in the wild. And inside the emergency cabin, as monitors remained silent and heat lamps hummed uselessly in the background, one truth began to settle into everyone's hearts. Sometimes the most critical decision is not about control. It's about letting go. And still, no one knew what would happen next. The wind howled louder now, swirling snow into sharp spirals that danced through the air like spirits stirred from slumber. But within this frozen world, a stillness remained, an unspoken agreement between man and bear. Mike stood just a few feet away from Kaya, her cub still nestled at her side, both motionless under the falling snow. Every eye in the sanctuary, behind glass, behind fences, behind instinct and reason, watched in utter disbelief. No one had planned for this moment. No manual covered this. And yet, there it was, an impossible pause in the laws of nature. For a long time, Kaya didn't move. Her massive body shielded the cub, her breath slow and deep. But it wasn't just warmth she was giving. It was something deeper, a kind of presence, a quiet, ancestral rhythm that told the cub, "I'm here. I won't leave you." She didn't nudge him to rise. She didn't whine or paw at him in panic. She just laid there in silence, wrapped in the cold but offering everything she had left. Mike remained still, his breath shallow, unsure if this was the end or the beginning of something else entirely. And then, the cub twitched, a small motion, a fragile flick of his paw against the snow, the kind of movement you could miss if you blinked. But Kaya saw it. Her head lifted slightly and she let out a sound, barely audible, low and humming, like a vibration passed from one soul to another. The cub stirred again. A second paw moved, this time toward her, weak but deliberate. Mike stepped forward, slowly. No sudden movements. Just a gentle approach, heart pounding so loud he could feel it in his fingertips. Kaya looked up, her black eyes calm but unblinking. There was no threat in her stare, no territorial claim. Just a deep, piercing awareness that said, "I know who you are now. You helped." With slow, careful steps, Mike knelt beside her. Snow crunched beneath his knees. He reached out, not aggressively, not fearfully, but with the soft, sacred energy of someone who had been chosen, just for this moment. Kaya didn't growl. She didn't flinch. She didn't even breathe faster. She just allowed it. The cub's body was colder than before, his breathing faint, but there was still life, still time. With both hands, Mike gently slid his arms under the cub's torso, lifting him as Kaya watched. He paused, waiting for any signal, any rejection, but none came. Her gaze followed him, steady and silent, as if passing the responsibility back once more. And then he stood, blanketed in snow, eyes stinging from wind and emotion. Mike turned and began moving toward the emergency cabin. The path was slippery, and the cold fought to slow his every step. But he didn't stop. Every motion was driven not just by urgency, but by reverence, as if he were carrying not just a cub, but something sacred, a message between worlds. And Kaya, she didn't follow. She didn't charge. She simply watched, like a mother trusting that for now, her part was done. Inside the cabin, the team had prepared everything. Heat pads were reactivated, fluids warmed, emergency protocols already in place. As Mike laid the cub back onto the treatment table, a quiet murmur filled the room. No one had expected him to return. Not like this. Not carrying the cub. Not carrying the weight of an entire species' trust in his arms. The team moved swiftly, but softly. Every hand that touched the cub did so with a tenderness that wasn't just medical. It was spiritual. The energy in the room had changed. The moment Mike crossed back through that door, something followed him. A shift, a ripple, as if compassion itself had stepped inside and reminded everyone what this was really about. It wasn't about statistics or conservation charts or biological behavior. It was about life, about love, about connection. And if you're watching this right now, feeling your chest tighten and your breath catch, if this moment has reminded you of the raw beauty that still exists in the world, please give this video a like. That simple gesture helps us reach more people who believe in moments like this, people who need to remember that kindness still matters, that even in the coldest places, warmth can be found in the most unexpected ways. As the team worked tirelessly to stabilize the cub once more, Kaya remained outside, her body beginning to blend into the snowdrifts. She didn't move. She didn't leave, and somehow, even with walls between them, everyone inside could still feel her heartbeat, pulsing through the silence. And though no one said it aloud, they all knew the truth. She was waiting. Again. Inside the small, heated clinic, time no longer followed the rhythm of clocks. It moved with the fragile rise and fall of the cub's breath, with the slow response of his tiny body to the warmth that surrounded him. The emergency team worked in near silence, their movements careful, eyes fixed on monitors that tracked every beat, every breath, every flicker of life that returned like waves after a storm. He had been diagnosed with advanced hypothermia. His internal temperature had dropped so low it was a miracle he'd held on at all. His heartbeat was irregular. His limbs were stiff. His body had begun shutting down long before Kaya delivered him to Mike's feet. And yet, somehow, there was still fight in him. Still a thread tying him to this world. They wrapped him in warm compresses. They carefully administered fluids. They adjusted the oxygen mask around his tiny snout, whispering words of comfort as if the cub could understand. Maybe he did. Maybe that's all that mattered. But no matter how intense things became inside, there was one presence that never changed. Kaya. She remained outside the clinic, unmoving, a silent sentinel in the snow. The storm had passed but left behind a biting cold that turned everything to glass. Still, she didn't leave. She didn't retreat to the forest. She didn't seek food or shelter. She just waited. From time to time, someone would glance out the frost-lined windows. And there she was. Her massive shape hunched in the snow, her fur crystallized with ice, her eyes never leaving the door. Some might call it obsession. Others might say it was instinct. But there were those on the team who recognized something else entirely. They remembered the stories told by the Inuit elders, those who had lived in harmony with this land long before clinics, before fences, before cameras. The Inuit speak of Nanurluk, the great bears, not just as animals, but as beings of spirit. They believe that bears hold souls, that they possess awareness and wisdom far beyond human comprehension. According to the old ways, when a bear approaches a human without violence, it is not an accident. It is a message. And this moment, felt like a message. For 2 full days, Kaya did not move far. She found a position just beyond the tree line, where she could see the clinic door. She neither growled nor paced. She showed no aggression toward staff who occasionally stepped outside, even those who walked with food or medicine. Her body remained still, but her eyes never wavered. Every now and then, a soft rumble would emerge from her chest, barely audible, like the hum of distant thunder, but it carried the weight of 1,000 emotions. Inside, the cub slowly responded. His body began to regain warmth. His vitals stabilized, though faint. Each time he blinked, it was a victory. Each stretch of his paw, a celebration. But his healing was not fast. It was fragile, like the first thin ice forming over a thawed river. One wrong move, one drop in temperature, and everything could be lost. Still, he held on, and still, she waited. Veterinarians took shifts sleeping in the hallway, refusing to leave the cub unattended. Mike never left the building. He sat near the treatment table, quietly writing notes, recording everything. The data, the behavior, the way Kaya had looked at him, the way she had not left, the way she had seemed to know. It was the waiting that transformed the atmosphere. Everyone on site began moving more gently, speaking more softly, as if they were in the presence of something sacred. Because that's what it felt like, a sacred waiting. A test not just of survival, but of connection. People who had worked with animals for years admitted they had never seen anything like it. They spoke less about science and more about feeling, about energy, about how you could stand outside for just a few minutes and feel Kaya's presence like a weight in the air. She was not threatening, she was not demanding, but she was there, unshakable, unrelenting, unmoving. One ranger said, "She's praying." Another whispered, "She's not leaving until he wakes up." And so they waited too. Not just as scientists or conservationists, but as witnesses. Witnesses to something that defied easy explanation. A wild mother who had given her cub to humans, and then stood vigil like a guardian spirit over the place where her child was being healed. She didn't chase them away. She didn't try to break in. She simply remained present. And that presence, her steady, determined stillness, spoke louder than any roar ever could. Because in a world that often rushes to explain, to classify, to divide, there are moments that demand we simply feel. And this was one of them. And though no one dared say it aloud, everyone was wondering the same thing. What would happen when the cub finally opened his eyes again? The hours melted into one another like snowfall over ice, silent, slow, and sacred. And then, on the morning of the 3rd day, something shifted. Inside the clinic, a soft murmur rose among the staff. The cub had begun to stir with more intention. His eyes, though still drowsy, blinked steadily. His body, though weak, started to stretch in subtle, cautious motions. It wasn't a sudden burst of energy, no dramatic moment of awakening, but it was enough. Enough for the team to look at each other and know the time had come. They prepared carefully. There would be no medical cords, no bright lights, no more sterile air between mother and child. Mike, who had stayed closest to the cub throughout his recovery, was the one chosen to carry him again. This time, it felt different. He wasn't carrying fear. He was carrying hope. Outside, the snow had softened. The sun, pale and flickering through the dense Arctic clouds, cast a faint glow over the treetops. And Kaya, she was still there. She had never left. For almost 70 hours, she had remained stationed within sight of the door. It didn't matter if it was day or night, storm or stillness. She never turned her back, and now, as Mike stepped out with the cub nestled against his chest, alive, breathing stronger, Kaya stood to her full height. Her ears perked, her body tensed, but not in aggression, in readiness. She knew. Mike moved slowly, speaking softly as he approached the same place where she had laid her cub before. Kaya lowered herself to the ground, her massive paws planted firmly in the snow, eyes locked on the little form in his arms. There was no growl, no sign of threat, only the weight of a moment that everyone around them felt pressing into their bones. He knelt and gently placed the cub into the snow, wrapped still in soft cloth. He stepped back. What happened next silenced even the wind. Kaya moved forward with purpose, but also with care. Each step deliberate, each motion filled with something primal and eternal. She reached the cub, lowered her nose, and breathed in his scent. For a heartbeat, she didn't move again. Then she let out a low, breathy sound. Not a growl, not a warning, but something else entirely. Something soft, something maternal. It was almost like a purr, if such a sound could live inside a bear. She nudged him once with her snout, then again, gentler this time, and the cub responded, his tiny paw lifting instinctively toward her. A vibration ran through the air. Not a sound, not a movement, just an energy, shared by everyone present. Kaya lowered herself fully onto the snow, curving her body protectively around the cub. The two of them curled into one form once again. A circle, a hole. And those who watched from the clinic steps knew this wasn't just a reunion. It was a recognition. A moment of reconnection that rewrote every assumption anyone had ever made about wildness, about instinct, about the line we draw between their world and ours. No one dared to speak. Some had tears in their eyes. Others held their breath, afraid that even the sound of emotion might disturb this miracle. It wasn't just that the cub had survived. It was that Kaya had waited, and trusted, and returned. The cub let out a faint squeak, pressing his body deeper into her warmth. Kaya answered with another soft vibration, a sound that only those closest could hear. And yet it seemed to echo across the trees, the snow, the silent breath of the Arctic. Mike stood still, the cloth from the cub's recovery still in his hands, unsure whether to cry or smile. He glanced at the others. No one needed to say a word. They all knew. They had just witnessed something sacred. Now, as this story reaches you, wherever you are in the world, we want to hear from you. Because stories like this remind us that compassion, connection, and love aren't limited to language or species. They're universal. They cross ice and fear and centuries of distance between us and the wild. So, where are you watching this from? Are you surrounded by snow like Kaya was? Or maybe watching from a city, a mountain, a forest, or somewhere warm and far away? We're always amazed at how these moments reach hearts across continents and cultures. Let us know in the comments. Tell us where you are and how this story made you feel. Because stories like this don't belong to just one place. They belong to all of us. They stayed there in the snow for hours, Kaya and her cub, curled together like they were the only two souls that existed in that vast, frozen wilderness. It didn't matter that the sun was beginning to fade behind the heavy Arctic clouds again. It didn't matter that the cold had returned with its teeth bared. Nothing else mattered. Because the impossible had just happened, and not through force, not through fear, but through understanding. Back inside the observation post, no one moved much. They whispered when necessary. They walked quietly. Every action felt like it had to be measured with reverence. Because something had changed. Not just for the animals, but for them too. This wasn't just a wild animal rescue story anymore. This was something ancient reawakening inside modern hearts. A primal remembering that life is connected in ways science still struggles to explain. Some would say Kaya's actions were just instinct, that she sensed her cub was dying and took a desperate chance, that she recognized the warmth, the scent, the movement of humans, and placed her final hopes in them like a gamble. But if you were there, if you saw the way she looked at Mike, the way she waited without aggression or panic, the way she stayed every second while her cub fought to stay alive, then you'd understand why no one present accepted that explanation fully. Because this didn't feel like survival. It felt like love. Not the human kind wrapped in words and promises, but the silent kind that lives in every mother, every creature that's ever had to protect something smaller, something more fragile than themselves. The kind of love that crosses boundaries of language, of species, of fear. Kaya didn't ask for anything. Not food, not shelter. She didn't try to enter the clinic, didn't react with rage when her cub was taken from her arms, didn't flinch when strangers surrounded him with machines and tubes. She simply trusted. And in that trust, she taught everyone watching a lesson more powerful than any textbook could offer. The Arctic is not a gentle place. It's a land carved by ice and time, a place where only the strongest survive, and often even they do not. But within that cold, harsh world, something soft happened, something that melted walls, not snow, that opened hearts, not shelters. For a brief moment, human and wild were not separated by fear or fences. They were one in heartbreak, one in hope. That image of Kaya lying beside her cub, watching the humans carry him with care, then waiting day after day in silence, that will never leave the people who were there. It won't leave the hearts of those who now carry this story. Because when a wild animal offers you its child, it isn't instinct that guides that moment. It's something deeper, something spiritual, something sacred. It reminds us that maybe we're not as different as we think, that compassion is not a human invention, that trust is not limited to domesticated creatures, that love doesn't need language. We often speak about wild animals as other, as beings to study, to protect, or sometimes, unfortunately, to fear. But Kaya flipped that entire script. She didn't just become a story, she became a bridge. One paw in her world, one glance into ours. She reminded us, without roaring, without running, that some truths exist beneath explanation. Perhaps it's no coincidence that in the Inuit tradition, bears are seen as spirits, as beings who walk between the physical and the spiritual. They believe that when a bear approaches a human, it carries a message, not always a warning, but sometimes a calling, a reminder. And maybe this was it. A mother bear who risked everything, a human who chose compassion over caution, a cub who survived because two worlds collided without violence, and somewhere in between it all, a spark. A moment that couldn't be measured, couldn't be planned, couldn't be recreated, only remembered. Because it wasn't just a rescue, it was a reunion. Of species, of soul, of something far older than we are. Coming back to life, even if just for a moment, in the snow. And as the Arctic wind began to rise again, sweeping over the trees and across the frozen lake, the clinic lights dimmed into the cold. But no one left that place the same. No one. And now, as their silhouettes slowly disappeared into the forest's edge, Kaya walking at a measured pace, her cub nestled safely against her side, the snow continued to fall like a soft curtain, closing a chapter that felt more like legend than memory. Those who had watched didn't wave, didn't shout. They just stood in silence, deeply aware that they had been witnesses to something far greater than a simple animal rescue. This was the kind of story that stays with you. That rises back in quiet moments and reminds you what truly matters. Not just survival, but connection. Not just instinct, but intention. Not just the wild, but what it awakens in us. If this moment touched something in you, if Kaya's courage, her stillness, her unshakable love stirred your heart, then don't let this be the end. This channel is a home for real stories like this. Stories that don't need narration by fantasy because reality, when it's raw and honest, is more powerful than anything we could ever make up. Stories of trust between species, of resilience in impossible conditions, of wild encounters that reveal the soul beneath the fur and the humanity in those who choose to care. So, if you felt something while watching this, if you paused to breathe more slowly, or held back a tear you weren't expecting, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to the channel right now. Click the bell icon so you never miss these rare and sacred moments, because they don't happen every day, but when they do, they deserve to be seen, shared, and felt deeply. And after you click subscribe, don't go far, because the next story is already waiting. Another encounter from the edge of the wild, another moment of instinct transformed by compassion, another life touched by the silent bond between human and animal. It's appearing right here on your screen, real life, real emotion. Right here with us, we'll see you there.